Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby, and I am here with three Emmy nominees from the sound team of The Last of Us, supervising sound editor Michael Benavente, re-recording mixers Marc, Fishman, and Kevin Roache. Thank you so much for joining me. You all, represent 2 of 25 nominations for The Last of Us at this year's Emmys, which is an incredible number. What was that day like when nominations were announced and you saw the amount of recognition for this show?
I can start. I can be somewhat negative sometimes, so I was sort of avoiding looking. I knew they were announced, but I waited. I think they got announced about 8 o'clock a.m. Pacific time. I wait, or maybe 8:30. I was around 9. I think Marc called me to tell me the good news because I was too afraid to look myself.
Yeah, it was pretty. I think it was pretty amazing for me. I thought it was. We were thrilled with the sound nominations, but then you just kept reading the list and seeing people that didn't expect in this supporting actor roles and all that, and so it just really excited for the show in general. I mean, to me, that was it that day. It was just, I was so happy for everybody involved.
Yeah, and for me, it was just just a huge thrill. And I was actually on vacation back in Massachusetts where I grew up, and I was with my kids and my whole family, and I got to share the news with them, which is exciting because I don't often get to do that since I live in California, and being able to enjoy that together with them made it personally really satisfying.
That's awesome. Well, I want to dive into your work here, and I can't have you all on this call without talking about the infected, because whether it is the runners or the clickers, I think the sounds from the original video game are so instantly recognizable to a lot of people. So how did you deal with that legacy, with the fact that audiences would probably be expecting certain sounds from those creatures?
Well, I think initially just creating the sounds with our sound designer, Chris Battaglia, and the rest of the crew, we knew we had this sort of legacy we had to honor, but we wanted to make it sort of fresh as we could and cinematic without pissing anybody off who loved the game. So there was a lot of experimentation, especially obviously with the clickers, which they do sound very similar to the video game. I think just a little more cinematic. We actually brought the original actors who did the video game after we tried other things at first. We thought, let's bring them in, and they gave us new performances and sort of a kit to pull from sound wise. And then these two gentlemen here on the call with me, they were able to put that stuff in the room spatially just to make it sound really interesting, I think, and fun to listen to. I mean, that clicker scene in the second is the second or third episode, I already forgot. I play that all the time for my own joy at home. So
it really does perfectly embody the game. Marc or Kevin, was that difficult for you to was there pressure to live up to something, or?
There was no pressure for me because I had not played the game beforehand. So I don't know. No, so you take the material, you pay attention to what's going on screen dramatically. And, you listen to Craig Mazin, who knows what he's talking about and exactly what he wants. And you put all that together and you just put the work in there. I hadn't played the game, but Marc, you played it beforehand, right?
Yeah.
What did you?
Well, I think the biggest thing that ended up happening was, because that's in episode 2, and that's the episode that Neil Druckmann directed. And it's actually interesting thinking back about it. I think Neil didn't have any comments about the clickers. I think he was really happy. But I think one of the things that Craig found was, in working with Michael and Chris Terhune, was it ended up being a lot about performance. And I think that I think they were able to really solidify that into the VFX stuff they had done. But that was the one thing that Craig was always working on. It was how to get a performance out of it. And sometimes that would be putting in extra breaths or taking things out. And so it was really a crafted thing. But I think everybody who saw it, Kevin and I always get comments, and Michael, that it's very similar to what they remember from the game.
Well, also speaking of the game, you're all nominated for that first episode, When You're Lost in the Darkness, which features this incredible, uniquely shot moment, the sequence when the camera is in the back of the car from Sarah's point of view. And being in that point of view of her character makes the sound of all the chaos outside the car sound just so much more intense, I think, than it would have. Can you talk about how you created that sequence and how the shot setup affected the way you built the sound?
There's a lot of detail, obviously, in that, with crowds and guns and offstage explosions. And I think, Kevin, we did probably eliminate a lot of stuff once it got too thick. I think we just picked the best stuff, placed it in the right areas. It was really interesting because, Craig Mazin is this great writer, and most writers love all their words, but there's some dialogue in the truck where he had Marc sort of mute the dialogue. It's not that important here. To hear a writer say that is phenomenal. So I mean, it's unusual. And because he knew that some of the sounds that we had created were making the scene work, and we didn't really need to hear every little line when Joel and Tommy are sort of yelling at each other. That was mostly loop stuff. And it just, we just need to know that they were emotional at that point. We didn't need to hear exactly what they were saying. And it gave more room for effects and things going on outside the truck.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we focused on, the first couple of passes through that scene, I had done a ton of dialogue panning, and I tried to make it feel as much as the video game, like the video game as I had remembered. But it became one of Craig's big notes about it was really keeping the focus on Sarah, and we weren't having to tell the story through the dialogue and what was going on, but it was with all the sound effects and how she was feeling and how she was interacting with Joel. And it just became a much bigger thing about feel and about keeping perspective on Sarah and trying to make mixed decisions based on that. And I think where we ended up, I mean, we're all so super proud of that scene.
Let me ask Marc, if I can ask a question. Well, that moment I remember, because in the game, when you watch, and if anybody watches even that scene from the game and on YouTube, you feel the dialogue pan, because in the game engine, it's like wherever your perspective goes, you feel the dialogue move. And I remember you had really tried to mimic that, I think, to honor the game. Was that more like trying that thing about keeping it less? Was that distracting from the moment with Sarah? And is that why it was about reducing that?
Yeah, I think so. I think what wasn't necessarily working with all the wild pans, it didn't sound like a cohesive narrative, and it just ended up not being about what they were saying. I think that was, right. I think the narrowing it in, there's still panning and stuff going on in there. But yeah, I think it ended up being Craig's big note about focus and keeping focused. And I think that's something Sam will keep talking about on this is, when you work with somebody like Craig, and you see it in Chernobyl, you see it in this series, there's nothing here that Craig didn't have a reason to ask us for or not to have us do something. It's also placed to serve the story. And so it was an amazing journey. I mean, I think we mixed for 4.5 months straight in the end, and spending so many days with him and going through those things. All that stuff was always in service of the story. And Craig also, I don't know if a lot of people realize this, Craig is a huge gamer too. So it's not just about Last of Us. He would talk about, him and Neil would just talk about what video games they were playing whenever they come in together. But it was always about servicing that. And I think there's no decisions we made. I don't think there's any decisions Michael made that weren't ever in service of the story. Nothing here happened by accident.
Right. And Michael talked about, Craig didn't mind hearing some of the words fall away because they don't matter. And it's just, as you get to know Craig, you realize that when he writes, he's not necessarily writing dialogue. It is about moments. And so this moment is about the crowd bursting through the glass when the infections start happening. And this moment is about, that. So it's all about just carving that specific thing that the audience is supposed to be paying attention to in that exact second. And so we did that is what we tried to do with mixing, is shaping all of those things. We want you to hear this, we want you to hear this, we want you to hear this, and then putting it all together. And he really guided us through every moment in that entire sequence.
Well, speaking of the concept of moments like that, the show, there are these action scenes and intense scenes, but it always balances that with moments of nature and moments of silence. Although I know in your world, silence really never just pure silence.
Right.
So I would love to know how do you go about building those quieter moments like that where there is supposed to be silence?
Well, one of the biggest challenges for those kind of scenes was that, it's a different world. It's a dystopian world. There's a lot less people on the planet. So you're not going to hear freeways or school bells or things we would hear, in our lives today. So we really had to sort of pick and choose the right backgrounds, the winds. I mean, there is a scene where Tess is on the balcony and her hair sort of, fluffs a bit, and you hear a wisp of wind, which you wouldn't really hear in today's world, but you might when there's a lot less people on the planet. So I think it really gave us a chance to try, just feet on leaves and things like that, with the cacophony of our society now, we probably wouldn't hear. But in this world, we really got to play up every little nuance, which I loved. And Kevin did a fantastic job with that stuff. So.
And also just a shout out, Michael has this great relationship with Randy Wilson and his Foley crew, and they did such fantastic work, such detailed Foley work for every little touch, every little movement, anything any principal character came in contact with such detail and character that even when a scene is very quiet, you don't feel the people don't vanish. The world doesn't fall away, because you can still feel these people present, and you can get a real sense of the textures and how everything feels in the world. And we really relied on them, and they did such an excellent job.
Well, and I think, Sam, too, you can see, we talk about the show, you talk about episode 3, which is a long, long time, which is the Bill and Frank episode. And I would say it was one of the most challenging because there isn't a lot going on. It's these two men in a house with no neighbors, no world outside. And it's a really, really interesting thing. A lot of times we're being told to take things out. We don't want to hear birds. We don't want to do this. And so there were lots of discussions about how do we fill this out and not make it sound like two actors on a set. And Kevin and Michael and the Foley team, I mean, my job was really easy. I got the dialogue laid in, and then Kevin and Michael had to go through and just do all these nuanced things. And I spent a lot of time in dialogue getting tones and hums and buzzes and air out. And this was the time I'm telling Kevin, okay, we need more air, we need more room tones, and working through that and really trying to craft that so it didn't sound like a stage play. And I'm super proud of what we did with that episode. That was very, very challenging, in addition to the scenes with the clickers or the big action stuff later on. It's a really great moment in the series.
Yeah, some of those quiet scenes to me were, and you guys probably agree, a little more challenging than the big action sequences, because we just the scenes where Bill and Frank are having dinner and it's uncomfortable and they don't really know each other yet, and just every wine glass had to, Craig went over like every wine glass on the table, every piece of silver removed, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems maybe it just really paid off, I think. I guess that's what I want to say.
Yeah.
Well, that level of nuance, Michael, you brought up a while back the concept of experimentation. How much experimentation does that take? How long does it take before you say, okay, we've got it, we've created that world?
Well, especially with the Infected, those, we tried a lot of stuff. And, I think when we first started presenting stuff for Craig, he felt it was too monsterish. And it really, these are humans who are infected. They're not monsters. And so we really had to go with more human sounds. And one of the notes that Craig had given us, or we came up with, was that, it's almost like an asthmatics. They can't breathe. That's their big issue, is their lungs are infected. So once we had that note in our head, everybody was able to sort of, okay, this is what it's like when you're struggling to breathe at different levels, all the way to becoming a bloater. And so, and Craig, he's given me permission to say this, he did a lot of the voices of the infected because he knew what he wanted. And then we took his material as well, and we treated it and played with it. And, he knew the performances he wanted, especially like even Nana, the old lady in episode 1 who first gets infected. That's a lot of Craig. But we tried a lot of stuff before we got there, and that just ended up being the best, so.
Well, and I think the other thing too, Michael, that's really interesting and different is sometimes you go into a mix, you do these things and you have your palette, and then you kind of go and that's it. And maybe people will say, let's be reductive and take these things out. with Craig, it didn't matter. He was always finding it too, right? He had this vision in his head, but he's very specific about things, but he would always kind of be on the journey with us to try and find things and try different things. And sometimes you wouldn't know that what wasn't working for him was there wasn't enough leaves in the footsteps with Riley and Ellie in the mall, right? He would find these moments that would really heighten it, and then you kind of put it together and go, duh. But he doesn't make content. He doesn't write shows that are quote unquote obvious. There's a lot of finding and figuring out with him, and it's a great journey. And he's an amazing collaborator. I mean, everybody, and HBO was so supportive, and that equates to time, which equals money, and just everybody was on the same page and had the same vision of what the show could be. And I think obviously with the success of it, that all paid off for them.
And Mark, you made me think when you talked about the leaves and the footsteps. I mean, that's something that Craig is, I would say, highly allergic to. If anyone were to think like, well, that wouldn't happen, or that doesn't seem real, it's the utmost important thing to Craig is that everything seems plausible and real. And so he's just always looking for ways to sell this environment, to sell this experience as a very real thing. And so if these people are walking through this mall that's been abandoned for 20 years, there's going to be some bits of things under their feet, and that's just kind of the mindset that he gave to every last moment in the entire show, and it really paid off.
Talking about all the quiet moments and the experimentation with it just makes me think there's so many different disciplines and skill sets involved in creating the sound for a series like this. And I feel like an audience member may not always realize how much goes into that. What would you want those audience members to know about your work? What might they not realize yet that you really would like them to understand?
Well, I have to sometimes even explain to my own family, and I've been doing this for 40 years. It's like, those gunshots there were real guns on the set. That beautiful wind you hear with the little chirpy bird, that they didn't pick that up with a microphone on the set. So I want people to know that as wonderful as production mixers are and how great production dialogue can be, most of this stuff is put together almost like a painting, a little bit of red, a little bit of blue. Let's not put anything here. It's all basically added later, and that's what we do, all these guys.
Well, and I think, Michael, and I say this, I've said this to a lot of people over the years, one of the best things people can do, Sam, is go watch any of our shows not in English. So put on the Spanish or the whatever, and you'll hear everything that we had to add, right? Because so much of what we have is the English dialogue track, and that's what people are focused on. But if you go watch it in Spanish and hear everything else, you realize everything else was created by us after the fact. And that's not to take anything away from, as Michael said, the amazing production sound we got from Michael Playfair. But you can start to see how much stuff is crafted, and you'll hear all the beautiful Foley that Kevin had in there, and you'll hear all the ambiances and all the subtle things and all the off-camera things. I mean, the beginning of episode 2 is the fantastic thing in Jakarta, but then we finally come across Ellie sleeping, and Michael and Kevin did an amazing job of putting in that abandoned place in that warehouse. It's just an amazing use of subtle sounds. And I think if you go listen to that again without the English dialogue, you'll get a sense of what we do and what we've created.
And then, to build on that, I think, two things. One is, as Michael's saying, it's like a painting, everything is put there specifically for a reason. And, then beyond the sound work, I would just say to the general public, like, everything is like that. Production design, like, even if I look behind Michael right now, I know he's a movie lover because I can see the posters, and people make these choices with characters and things on the screen. I explain that to my family, and it's almost like, a movie can go by you in 2 hours, or a TV show can go by you in an hour, and you can, I understood the story or whatever, but you can actually watch these things over and over again and get so much of a fuller meal out of it. And then the other thing I would say is, if you have access to Atmos, We worked really hard. If people, I don't know if people are generally familiar with the Atmos format, but basically this, surround format on steroids. And we worked really hard at that. So if you ever get a chance to watch the show in that format, please do.
Well, that'll be the next thing I do is go to Atmos to watch it, but it sounds great in whatever format it is. So congratulations to you all on your Emmy nomination. Very well deserved. And for those watching, make sure you stick with us for the rest of this season. And thank you all once again for chatting with me.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Sam.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.